Right now. So welcome everyone. This is Farmstand Design and Operation. My name is Claire Menard. I'm with WSU Kitsap Extension and Regional Small Farms, and I'm the new and beginning farmer education coordinator. And so this is a class we've wanted to do for a while. Farm stands are becoming more and more popular, as I'm sure all of you are aware. That's why you're here tonight. And we're really seeing that farm stands have become a cornerstone or even central part of a lot of farm businesses in the area. Just a moment. All right, so my background, I used to be a farmer, so a farmer for several years, and that included working on farms with farm stands. So my first experience really with farm stands is it was back in 2020. I worked on Lopez Island, and there it was a place called Horse-Drawn Farm, and they had a highly successful farm stand. I think it was something like 75 to 85% of their income came from that farm stand. So I really learned so much working there. And then I took that experience and came back to Paulsbo the following year and returned to Around the Table Farm. And I helped expand their farm stand. I think by the time I left, their sales had tripled from my first season there to my last season. And it's become a lot larger piece of their business. I mean, obviously, not just my work, but everyone that works there. They've all had a hand in that. But I learned so much in the process of starting out at an established farm stand and then coming and applying some of that experience to a farm stand that was in the middle of being expanded. And then, so I'm bringing that experience to this class. And then I also visited 3 different farm stands in the Tri-County area. So I went to Chai's Farm in Squim, Midori Farm in Quilcene, and Fat Turnip in Kingston. I also interviewed all of those farmers. And just a quick shout out, I want to thank all of them for taking the time to impart some of their wisdom so that I can then share it with y'all. So if you want to support those farm stands, I would not object. And then lastly, we have Scott Chichester here from Chai's Farm, one of the farm stands I visited. And he will be speaking throughout my presentation, and then we're going to have a conversation about farm stands at the end. All right, so this is the least fun slide out of the whole presentation. I wanted to put it at the end of the presentation, then I was like, no, worst first. And the reason it's the least fun is just it can be the biggest challenge, the biggest headache. It's not always clear. And I just want to preface this with the saying that the amount of questions that Scott and I can answer on this is pretty limited, as the rules they vary widely county by county, and WSU isn't a regulatory entity, so I can't really speak fully on regulations. But I do have some good news. Like I said, I'll be sending out a resource list that will also be posted online. And that's going to have contacts for each of our 3 counties, as well as links to websites so that you can do your own education about what the regulations are. And then I know we have some folks this evening from outside the peninsulas. And my advice to you is to contact someone at your local conservation district and also at your Department of City Development, also called the DCD. Again, everything is really dependent on the county you're in, the zoning you're in, like whether you're on agricultural land or residential, and then the current regulations. And so what you're able to do with the farm stand depends on the structure, the size of it, its proximity to the road, and then parking. And then it also depends what you're able to do depends on what you're selling. So you might just be selling raw produce, And that's a bit easier to sell in my experience. But then when you start adding value added, if you're going to be doing canned goods, you need permitting to sell that to the public. And then if you are selling dairy, meat, eggs from other farms, or ready to eat, not shelf stable meals like frozen soups, that's when a lot more food safety rules and permitting come into play. So again, you'll want to check with your county and your zoning and all of that. Some other things to consider is your insurance might not cover food if you're selling food from other farms. So you might have your farm insurance that covers the food you sell. Once you start selling another farm's food, might not always cover it. So that's a good thing to look into. Then there's also things to consider like sales tax for non-food items like soaps or candles. That's a pretty easy one to deal with though. You can put that with the sales tax, you can add that into the price, make it a round number so it's still easy for customers to purchase. Also, if you're going to have people weighing food, you need to get proper weights and measurements. It's a whole what do you call it? Like part of county or state regulations. It's pretty easy to do. It doesn't cost you anything. Someone just has to come out and certify your weighing equipment and make sure that it's all up to code. So those are some considerations. I would say no matter how you decide to structure your farm stand, it's always good to know the regulations, especially when they're being changed, especially pretty drastically within your local government. And sometimes they're seeking farmer input, so it's good to stay on top of these things. I just want to say no one wants to build a farm stand only to find out later that they have to tear it down. So regulations are something to keep an eye on. One farmer that I interviewed said the changes have been really harmful to the local food network. I think that's something that all farmers need to know about, and then also your local county members, your local city council members, county government, they all need to know that how it's affecting the local food system because it's not on purpose. And then Scott, did you want to add anything to this part of the presentation?
Yeah, I would just say that some of the things that I've learned are that you might want to, well, if you want accurate information, then you do need to go to your county. But you might also consider, the more you ask, the more people look at you. And so just bear that in mind. What I have learned in the last year is that there's lots of rules, but there's not a lot of enforcement always. And so it's just good to know that sometimes there's some gray areas there. I'll just leave it at that.
Good advice. Okay, so let's get onto the fun stuff. So why would you want to start a farm stand? Well, there's a lot of advantages for farmers. You can increase your revenue. You can use it as a drop point for CSA. You can collaborate with neighbor farmers, build retail clients across many different revenue streams. And then there's the convenience of it. So this, I definitely asked this question of all the farmers I interviewed, and they said a lot of interesting things. Meeting a need for fresh local produce was one of them. One of them said it's the simplest, cheapest way to sell. It brings sales to the farm, and some people I know have been able to stop going to the farmer's market, which if you've been going to the farmer's market for decades, it can be helpful. Can have Saturdays off maybe, or work a little bit less, even though we all love our farmers markets, right? It helps build a more robust local food system and enhances the local agricultural network. One person said it's one-stop shopping, especially when partnering with other farms that produce dairy, meat, value-added products. You can kind of make a miniature grocery store. And then another important thing to know is that the farmers I interviewed listed their sales from their farm stand as anywhere from 20 to 90% of their total farm revenue. So all of them have farm stands. They're a pretty crucial part of their farm business. So using farm stands to increase your revenue, many factors can determine how central it is to your farm stand business or to your farm business. So some farms use it as a main source of revenue, and some use it as a place to sell surplus. Oftentimes, farm stands, in my experience, from what I've seen, they start small and then they grow in popularity and they grow organically from there. So it's a business model that can be really flexible. And then I think another really important point is that you get your retail profit, but people are coming to you. You don't have to go to them. You don't have to like set up a booth at the farmer's market, and you're not selling wholesale. So you get to keep that retail profit all to yourself. A really important piece of farm stand sales is that you can increase your shoulder season sales. So when your CSA ends because you don't have enough crops to feed, say, like 100 families or 50 families, you can still have revenue coming in even when the farmers markets are closed. And this is especially true in the Pacific Northwest where we have mild winters and we can grow things year round.
If I
So,
can, if I can just add to
oh
that,
yeah, go for it.
you know, as the farm stand on our farm has gained popularity, it has partly because we also have really increased our greenhouse space that we can grow in, but it has made our cash flow very much a year-round thing that while it peaks in the summer, is still very formidable amount of income. And so I don't see it so much as even shoulder seasons as much as it is there's a year-round baseline with a big peak in the middle of the summer, but I am able to keep staff on all year long and keep a very consistent cash flow all year. So that's a huge win for us.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction to make, and it just shows like how beneficial farm stands can be to the farm business. Um, So, and also, even if you're like a really small operation, it's a way to extend the season or just keep things going year round. So you can sell plant starts or flowers, things that can be sold that start coming up before you have a huge variety of produce to offer to people. You can sell value added products. Those are really popular with tourists. They're popular around the holidays. So like honey jams, pickles, fermented veggies, wreaths. You can even do like soaps, candles, crafts. There's all sorts of ways that you can make money with value added products. And then you can sell winter crops, storage crops like onions, potatoes, beets. Can also sell winter greens like kale, collards, or you can do radicchio. And also you can sell before, say, the farmer's market opens. You might be an early spring and you have a ton of raw or a ton of purple sprouting broccoli. It's a great place to sell, is out of your farm stand. And yeah, if you get a lot of tourists at your farm stand, it's a really good idea to have these value added products that hold well, that aren't perishable, and they can take them with them, give them as gifts. So when I worked at Around the Table Farm, we used the farm stand as a CSA drop spot, and they've continued to do that. It was really a genius idea on their part because we were able to use the farm stand for a dual purpose. And it was really convenient because it was also close to the pack shed. And so what I witnessed is that folks would often buy extra when they were picking up their CSA boxes. And then the CSA is visible to farm stand customers as well. So they might be interested in joining the CSA, or they might pass along that information to friends who are interested in a CSA. And it's a good way to keep customers, even if you like lose CSA members, they might just transition to be farm stand customers. Then Scott, do you have CSA pickup at your farm stand itself?
I do, yeah. For a few years there around COVID, we had actually packed all our shares into big bags, and put them in a reach-in fridge in the farm stand. And then we built a walk-in cooler just right next door to the farm stand that is specifically for the CSA. But I'll watch people come and they go into the walk-in cooler, they get their share, they double check what's there, and then I would say more than half of them will then go into the farm stand and buy additional items before they leave the farm.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So farm stands are also another great way to build a network. Just like your farmers market is a place where you connect with the community and you meet people from all around you. A farm stand can be that same place of gathering and connection. So you can connect with your neighbors. I saw this a lot. You can connect with people who might not have a schedule to be able to attend the farmers market. And this might even be their first introduction to locally grown produce, which is awesome. It's great to get people into their local food systems. It's also a way to collaborate with other farms and food producers. So sometimes at around the table, we would have farmers selling like their berries or something at the farm stand, which would bring in customers. Customers would buy the berries and they'd buy some of our produce. So it became a really collaborative effort. And then also it can bring, oh, you could also bring in wholesale produce, and that helps expand your season, expands your season's offerings. And this is something that they do at Fat Turnip Farm. So some Western Washington farmers, they do this with like larger local farms, or they even bring in produce from Eastern Washington. And then it's a way to build a network with your community. So you can build awareness of and loyalty to your farm. People are going to go into grocery stores and restaurants, or they're going to see your booth at the farmer's market and they're going to recognize you, and vice versa. So it's just a way to gain customers, gain loyalty, create connections in your community. And then, not to be overlooked is the convenience of farm stands. So you can have flexible hours. So you set the hours and what days you're open. You can decide the seasonality of the business. You know, you can be year round, like at Chai's Farm Stand, or you could be seasonal, like at Fat Turnip. And so whatever you decide to do, it might not always be the best for business, like if you're only open on Mondays and Tuesdays. But the positive part of that is you can shape the farm stand to fit your lifestyle and your schedule. Then also, you don't have to transport the vegetables. It's as close as to the farm as customers can get, especially if the farm stand is on the farm, which most of them usually are. This equals less labor, and you don't have to use gas to move your product around. And then also you can scale up or stay small. So there is ways to expand your farm stand. It's very flexible. And it's a low risk, a low overhead cost. And this is key, especially if you already have the structure. You're not going to need to invest a lot to get that farm stand going. You know, at Around the Table Farm, we used their garage, and it was a very easy, open, big, clean space that we could sell vegetables out of right next to the road. Made it a really simple setup, and it was something that was already there. So there are some things to consider before you do start a farm stand. It demands attention at somewhat inconvenient times. So whether you're staffed or self-serve honor system, Someone needs to keep an eye on the farm stand and keep it stocked, including the weekends if it's open. And if your farm stand gets more popular, you're going to need more labor to keep it stocked, keep it cleaned, all of that. And this is one of the main drawbacks that I hear farmers talk about is that they always have to be home to keep an eye on the farm stand or hire someone to do that. And that's especially difficult on the weekends when, you want a day off. And it's especially true of the self-serve farm stands with the all-day hours. You have to kind of shape your life around it or hire someone. And there are also lifestyle alterations. There's liabilities and responsibilities that come with having the public on your property. And especially if you live on the property, there can be a lack of privacy. And people do weird things, they park in strange places, they go where they're not supposed to go. So that is something to consider, though there are ways to limit that. And there's other things that go into it, labor costs if you're staffed, theft if you're self-serve. You might have to alter your crop plans to fit the needs of the farm stand. And sales can fluctuate. They're not always dependable, though if you build up a good reputation and a strong following of customers, they're a lot more dependable. And then lastly, of course, there's the headache of regulations and permits, especially when they're changed on you by the local government. And then I think it's important to consider the advantages of farm stands from a customer's point of view. So instead of going to the grocery store, they go to your farm stand. They're going to see exactly where their money goes and who it supports. And when they go there, they're buying the best produce that their money can buy. We all know how much better local farm produce is than grocery store produce. They make a personal connection. This is why people love the farmers market as well. It's small and personal. You get to know your customers' names. And then there's the ease of farm stands. I think about when I go shopping at the farm stand, sometimes I'm in and out of there in like 2 minutes. That never happens if I go to the grocery store. It's always hard to find parking. It takes a long time to check out. And also, you have to think about the flexibility of the hours of a farm stand, especially if you're open year round all the time, self-serve farm stand. It might fit people's schedule better versus going to the farmer's market. As someone who often has had to work Saturdays, this is a huge plus of farm stands. So when you're getting started with your farm stand, if you've decided to build one, you should consider these 4 questions. So first is location. Where are you going to put your farm stand? How will you build your farm stand? What kind of structure are you going to use? How are you going to display your produce and retain the quality of it? And then how are you going to operate? Are you going to be staffed? Are you going to be seasonal? How's it your farm stand going to function and flourish and succeed? So whether you build your farm stand on your property, on the farm property or off the farm property, they each have their pros and cons. Generally, people put them right on their farm, but there are places where it's away from their farm. And so the location is going to make the biggest difference as far as who the clientele are going to be. So whether you're rural, suburban, or in an urban environment, that's going to change who's shopping at your farm stand. Are they going to be tourists? Are they going to be people passing through if you're on a main road that goes right through town, like on a busy road close to a highway? Or are they going to be residents? And your business is going to have to be tailored to your customer base as far as what hours you're open and what you have to offer. And then do you have the option to have your farm stand located near a road? Are you going to be on a main road or a highway? Farm stands on busy roads are usually likely to get more business, but that isn't to say that being located far from a busy road means you won't be successful. If you're in a harder to reach place, this is where it really helps to have an established customer base and a strong marketing plan. And Scott, did you have anything to add here?
Um, Only just a little bit. I mean, in my past history of farming, we were maybe 4.5, 5 miles from kind of downtown, but it's a very spread out area around Squim. And people would often say, "Oh, it's so far to get out there. I'd shop there more if it were closer." And now in my current location, I'm maybe half that distance or less, so maybe 2 miles tops from downtown. And it seems like it's just within the magic bubble of people's frequency of shopping that they're willing to make that little bit of extra drive. And I don't have anybody tell me that it feels too far out to stop by. So location honestly really can matter in my sample size of two locations that were slightly different.
Yeah, I mean, I've read in a lot of different publications that with retail sales, location is everything, but there are ways to be creative about it, especially if you might live in a place that's hard to get to, but it might be on the way to a tourist destination. So that's where marketing and mixing revenue streams, which we'll get into later, that's where it really helps, especially if you're involved with agritourism.
The other thing that I would add is I've seen a few stands around that are located like right on a very busy road or, a state highway. And when it's, 50 or 55 and there's a lot of traffic, I drive by that and I think, man, I would never want to have to get on and off the road here. So do be conscientious of whether or not people are going to want to safely or be able to safely get on and off the road.
Yeah, that's a very good consideration. I read that it's like 50 and under is really like 50 is that top speed that you would want people driving. And I would say 40 because we all know if it's 40 miles per hour, most people are going 50. So yeah, all those things are really important to consider because people aren't going to want to risk their safety to stop at a farm stand. And also, it might be going so fast that they don't see it until it's too late. So parking is another really important thing to consider. It's actually a lot more important than most people realize. So first off, regulations do vary by county as far as what kind of parking you need, and it especially depends upon what kind of business you have, and that ties into whether you're selling just raw produce or selling things that have to be frozen like meat or things that involves food state safety like dairy products. And again, it depends on zoning. But when you're considering your parking area, you should be thinking about lighting. So that will make it so people can see any sort of obstacles. You want to keep it clear of hazardous items in situations like potholes, big divots where people can trip and hurt themselves. If you're open during the winter, just be cognizant of snow and ice. Put down salt if there's been a freeze. And then make sure, like we were talking about, that there's ample room for people to safely come and go. People aren't going to want to return if they have to park on the side of a busy road or make a dicey exit. Also, think about how long of a driveway you have, how long or short it is. When I worked on Lopez, I think their farm stand was at the end of like a quarter-mile long driveway. And they estimated that they've spent like upwards of $10,000 over the past few decades laying down gravel just because they got so much business and people had to drive so far up their private driveway to get to that farm stand. And then if you can, please make it ADA approved. You can do this. There's lots of resources online, but using properly compacted quarter minus gravel, you don't have to pave to make it ADA accessible.
And I would just add that if you're starting a new farm stand and you don't know how busy it will be when you're thinking about your location, think about what if it got way busier than I ever imagined, because I found myself in that situation, and what had seemed like a comfortable 2 or 3 car parking lot was no longer comfortable for all the traffic that we were getting, and we had to unfortunately cut some small trees and expand the parking lot and make more space just to fit all the cars, and we're now running up against that constraint again where it has continued to get busier. So just like try and dream big and look in the future and make sure that there's some room for growth, because you might find yourself surprised at how many people want to stop at your stand.
Yes, also a good thing to keep in mind. And this is where doing some business planning, doing some long-term goal making really comes into play and could save you some headaches in the future. So signage is also really important. And they should be posted where clearly directing people where they should go. Again, county regulations, they vary and they change depending on the size of the sign and placement and how strict the regulations are. But in an ideal world, you could put a sign by the closest busy intersection, a half mile, at a quarter mile, and then a turn here. You really want to hold people's hands and make it very clear how to get to your farm stand. And then some more advice is to make a big eye-catching bright farm sign without too much information on it. And then also make it clear where to park, the open hours, open and close hours, mark the actual building so people know where the farm stand is. And then also set boundaries around the farm stand so customers know where they should and shouldn't go. This will help keep everyone safe. A lot of people still ignore signs or don't read them, but it's also, this is why it's good to have signs that are legible from far away and eye-catching. Then also consider placing signs describing the extent of liability, which you can also find those online. So where you place your farm stand, if you have control over this, if you decide to build a farm stand, the placement of it is very important. You'll want to consider several things. Electricity is probably the most important because you need it for important things like lighting, refrigeration. You need it for a checkout stand if you're using a point of sale system or any sort of computer. And then also you should consider Wi-Fi, especially if you live somewhere where the phone service is really spotty and people need to get online to use Venmo. I have been at farm stands where I didn't have any phone service, so I had to leave the farm stand, and like 5 minutes later, I had to then remember when I had phone service to pay the farmer, which is kind of awkward and weird. And then also, this is another piece of looking into the future. Even if you don't sell things that need to be refrigerated or frozen right now for food safety, you should think about plumbing and the ease of putting plumbing into your farm stand in the future. This is really important for having hand washing stations and meeting food safety regulations. You should also think about shade. You don't want direct western sunlight hitting that farm stand and wilting all of your flowers or making your tomatoes really hot because you want to like retain the quality of the produce that you're selling. Another really important consideration is the proximity of the farm stand to your pack shed. If you can make them really close together, think about how you're going to store the produce that you use for restocking the farm stand. How far are you going to have to walk to grab the produce for restocking? walking back and forth, it really adds up. You can consider putting the pack shed in the same building as the farm stand. This is how it was set up on Lopez. It made stocking super easy. It allowed us to keep an eye on the farm stand. And depending on the kind of person you are, this could be a pro or a con, but we got to socialize with all the customers that came in. Depending on the day, it could go either way, how positive a thing that was. But at the very least, you should have an area nearby for filling up baskets of like tomatoes or weighing or bagging produce because it really helps to have that kind of workstation as close as possible to where you're selling the product. There are some things to think about when you're deciding where you're going to house your farm stand. So you can either build or use an existing structure. If you're using an existing structure, you can get pretty creative with what you use. You can use a garden or storage shed. You can use a garage, a barn. Some people starting really small even use tents. I've seen that on Bainbridge Island, and they're still highly successful, especially if it's just during like the spring and summer. The pros for using an existing structure is that it's low risk, low capital investment, which is really smart if you're starting out. And you can start small and grow from there and then build something in the future if you see that you have the customer base to support that. The con, I would say, is that you're limited to what you have and not necessarily what your farm stand needs. So you might need to expand and you don't have the building to do that, which can be a pain. If you are building a new structure, you need to do some really hard thinking about how big you envision your farm stand becoming. This is really good to do, like look 5, 10, 15 years in the future. It's always a good idea to not build more than you need, but thinking about your long-term plans and goals will help ensure that you have enough space for growth or that you can add on to the structure if you need to do so in the future. It's also good to consider what capital you have access to in order to begin your farm stand. And can you use grant funding for that? Do you have the time to wait for grant funding? So they're all things to consider. Again, what you build depends on regulations and zoning. Also, a good thing to consider is that some of the farmers I interviewed cited lack of space as a real concern because they need to expand their business and they don't have the space to do that. All right, so now I'm going to show you examples of the various farm stands I visited. So, just as a background, all these farms started their farm stands anywhere from 7 to 9 years ago. They're growing on anywhere from 10 to 29 acres. They're staffing from 5 to 10 full-time employees, including a couple year-round employees. So this is Chai's farm stand, and Scott, the owner, is the one that's been answering my questions tonight. As you can see, it's a very simple setup. It's a simple garden storage shed, and it looks like there's a gravel floor with plywood on top. So very simple design. It's clean, it's small, and as you can see, there's ample lighting, including like those Edison style bulbs. Creates a lot of warmth. And um there, you can also see that there's tablecloths over the surfaces, which add color, and I believe there's storage behind those tablecloths, so they kind of serve a dual purpose. And Scott, is there anything you want
Yeah,
to add?
we've kind of as we grew the farm stand, we used to only use about half of the building and just draped the tablecloths to sort of cut off the back side of the building. And now we have that all, we occupy the whole space really. And started to put up more shelving since you were here to take this picture.
Oh, cool.
Um, and I would just say that one of the key elements for us has been having things refrigerated and staying good. During the winter, during this time of the year, we could get by without it, but during the summer, that little uninsulated shed is an absolute cooker. And so having a reach-in refrigerators is absolutely essential to keeping stuff cool and looking really good. I know that that's a big expense. I searched around a lot when I was beginning my farm stand and found a really great deal on a old junky looking used three-door reach in, but it was functional. And after 8 years or something, I finally had to replace it this year. But the good news is that $750 reach-in fridge did so many thousands of dollars of business at a good retail price point that when it came time to replace it this fall, I was able to pay cash and buy a brand new unit. And the farm stand success of the farm stand model enabled me to do that. There was no question whether or not I could have another one. I had to have another one, and I was able to afford it because of the farm stand. So, and on that note, I would say we use a lot of plastic bags in our farm stand, not because I like plastic, but because that refrigerator is also a dehydrator, and so it's not the most elegant solution, but it's really functional in keeping things from wilty in the refrigerator. There's probably some other examples that people have of how they accomplish that, but it's just what I've chosen to do.
Yeah, that's amazing that that fridge lasted for so long and provided you with so many years of service. There's definitely ways to be creative with refrigeration and ways to keep it under budget. So this is Midori Farm Stand. This is in Quilcene, and it is also a pretty small farm stand if you've ever been there before. This is the outside of it on the left, and you can see that there's plant starts for sale. So this was during the springtime. They also have lots of signage, including marking their farm stand. And then on the right, we can see inside their farm stand. So they have fridges with their produce. Looks like their greens are bagged, and then they have some other stuff in cups. And then they have shelf stable produce on shelves. And this is Fat Turnip Farms and Country Market. And this one is in Kingston on your way to Hansville. And so they get lots of tourists going out to Point No Point. So this one, they built this one. I'll go back to Midori. They actually built this one too, and they're running up against size constraints. And I should also mention that Chai's and Midori, they're both honor system farm stands, whereas Fat Turnip is a staffed farm stand. So they're seasonal, they have hours, they're not open every day of the week. And then they built this farm stand as well. It's much larger. And as you can see, there's a ramp for accessibility, for wheelchairs. They have lots of signage, including a very legible, like open sign. They have lots of rustic decorations. And what else was I going to add? Oh, Fat Turnip also, they do a lot of cross-pollination with other farms. All the farm stands that I visited sold value-added products, a couple of them from other farms. Fat Turnip sells wholesale produce from other farms, and then they sell local produce. All of it's local, but they sell some local farmers like meat and fish. So how you operate your farm stand is really up to you, and it just like most other aspects of the farm stand, it can change with time. So you have that flexibility. So you get to decide if you're seasonal or year round. So starting with that, there are some things to consider. If you want to be year round, do you have the time or staffing for this? And it includes, even during the winter, harvesting, and it can get in the way of vacations or holidays. Also, some things to consider is, does your farm have the capacity to grow this much, along with other aspects of revenue streams like CSA or wholesale sales? And do you have the proper space for storage crops like onions and potatoes to keep them fresh and quality all year long? And then if you decide to be seasonal, you would have more freedom to leave the farm during the winter months, but you're losing that income stream. And often you need to remind customers when you reopen for business at the beginning of your open season. When you're considering hours, you'll want to think about the customers who want to shop. And this is more important for farm stands that are staffed because you have to be a lot stricter about the hours. If you're self-serve, usually the hours are either all the time or from dawn to dusk, so you don't have to think about it as much. But if you are staffed, you'll want to think about who shops with you. Is it tourists that come all summer long? Is it weekend visitors or tourists passing through? Do you have retirees who can shop at any time of the day? They might shop like on Tuesdays in the middle of the day, in which case you'd want to be open for them. Do you have weeknight shoppers, residents that are working 9 to 5s that come by on their way home? And yeah, if you just again, if you're staffed, you need to be more strategic about the hours because that's paid labor. And some pros of doing the honor system and unstaffed farm stand is you don't have to pay that labor to have someone there at the farm stand the entire time it's open. But even if you're self-served, it's especially important at the beginning to stick around the farm stand. So this ensures that you're not missing something that might be causing confusion or frustration with your new customers. And it's a good way to put a face to the farm and get to know your customer base. And just like another aspect of farm stands is the constant restocking, especially if you're busy. So you're going to have to pay someone to check in on the farm stand at the very least throughout the day. And then if you're staffed, you have to pay someone, but this is good for job creation, especially if someone on your crew really enjoys retail sales and customer service. You do have to have a much narrower schedule. And this is where it's important to track sales to see if the business should be open later or closing earlier, vice versa. And I would say that having a staffed farm stand, and especially if you're bigger, it leads to more customer satisfaction and face time. And a large farm stand or a staffed farm stand can handle a lot higher amount of traffic because you can check people out quicker and answer any questions.
Um, on that last one,
Yeah.
I just say that we operate in the honor system, which means that we're not technically staffed, but it has grown into something that's busy enough that there are staff that are in and out of the farm stand all day long doing restocking. And so there is a lot of opportunity for customers and answering questions. But it's not 100% of the time that people are there, but there's several hours of the day that people are in and out of there. And there is higher risk of theft, but as you might have seen in the picture of our farm stand, there's a very secure cash box. And I know Midori has gone through the same thing, coming up with a very secure way to keep people out of the money. But we have had theft in the past, and the one thing that I would remind myself of when it happened was I've saved so much in labor in operating an honor system farm stand that I've been able to look past a couple of times and consider them learning opportunities to make the cash secure, more secure, and then just move on with it. I didn't let it deter me that just because somebody stole money from the cash box. It's very like the win is absolute monetarily that when you're not paying staff, you're able to get more profit out of your farm stand.
Yeah, that's good to know, especially if your farm stand grows a lot in popularity, like Chai's Farm Stand has, you will need to have more staff on board stocking that, making sure everything's tidy, clean, fresh, and interacting with customers. So it's not unstaffed, it's just you don't have someone working a cash register per se. And we'll go over security. I'll be showing you a few examples of what those cash boxes look like. So what you need for display is going to vary depending on what you're selling, but it's pretty certain that you're going to need refrigeration. That's like a key piece of farm stands if you're going to be selling anything that needs to be refrigerated to retain its quality or for food safety. I always recommend glass doors because they showcase the product that you're selling. And then you need to think about, we'll go over how to keep your produce, different ways of storing your produce. But like Scott said, the fridges do dry out the produce. So you have to be creative about ways to keep it fresh. And you're going to be using different packaging to sell your products. It might be different from what kind of packaging you use at CSA for your CSA customers or at farmers markets. You might need berry cups and use them for not only berries, but like tomatoes or sugar snap peas. You might need rubber bands or twist ties, and then labels, which is a good place to do some marketing. And then I think this is often overlooked, but this is a picture again from Chai's Farm Stand and directions. It can seem obvious to a lot of us here how to use a farm stand and what we need to do, but think about customers that come in who have never been in a farm stand. They're going to be completely baffled. And so you need to make it very clear, give step-by-step guides to how to purchase your product. Oh, and then I also wanted to add that you can buy your fridges new, or you can look places like Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. Sometimes you'll find stores, restaurants, gas stations that are closing down or upgrading, and they'll be selling these fridges for a lot cheaper than what you could get them for new. And also, grant funding is an option for acquiring refrigeration. These are examples of various farm stands and how they keep their produce fresh. So you're going to want to refrigerate because it's really, I mean, it's important for many reasons, but I think it's really important for retaining the longevity of the product so that people, when they take it home, it continues to last for a long time. Because this is why we can charge a higher price point for local produce. It's going to be a lot fresher. So we want to retain that freshness. Some people, so on Lopez, they put their produce in plastic lined baskets, but this involved spraying it down so many times throughout the day, especially in the summertime. And it was a lot harder to keep it fresh. And Midori does something similar with some of their produce. They put it in plastic bins. And then this here on the right, sorry, Midori was in the middle here. And this on the right is from Chai's farm stand. And like he said, he uses plastic bags, which is really good at retaining that freshness. Now, all these farm stands, they generally sell their produce within a day or two. So it's not sitting for a long time. That's another thing to keep in mind. Other things to consider about your display is you're going to need tables and containers. Like I said, there many things can be thrifted. So these are all ways to keep the capital investment really low in your farm stand. You can use tablecloths to cover up old tables. I even saw where people were putting tablecloths over plywood on sawhorses. We want to make sure that's secure for safety purposes, but it's a great way to make a huge table without spending a bunch of money. And tablecloths can add color, which is always fun. And then you'll want good lighting. You want to display your product and keep the area safe. And then decorations are a good place to create ambiance. A lot of farm stands will go like for a rustic farm feel. Customers love this. They love that homegrown feel of going to a farm stand. If you think about like antiques, baskets, wood crates, hand painted signs, but be creative and go with your personal style. I will say that creating an aesthetic is really important if you're an agro-tourism spot. So like think you pick farm tours or a larger farm stand that's more like a destination. So create an area that's great for taking photos because people are going to take photos, they're going to post it, and they're going to do the work of marketing for you. These are just some tips and tricks that I found for creating a nice display. There's that adage of stack it high and watch it fly. We use that all the time at the farmers market, and I think it applies to farm stands in a lot of ways as well. Abundance is attractive and it makes people want to buy. We see this at the grocery store all the time. And even if you don't have a large amount of produce, there's ways to make it seem like you do to still make it look really attractive. So you can stack things, stack piles of produce. You can use baskets or wood crates. And you can put like fabric at the bottom and make it seem like they're fuller than they are. And then like right here, you can see the tomatoes at Chai's farm stand. He created vertical space. This picture here on the very left is from Fat Turnip, where you just have piles and piles of winter squash, though I'm sure those bins aren't all the way full. So using vertical steps like that, it creates depth to the space and it's pleasing to the eye. And then another principle of display is using color alternation. So if you have two green items, you put a colorful piece of produce in between. So like green lettuce, red lettuce, butter lettuce, kale, chard collards, cucumbers, radishes, zucchini. You get the idea. And some other things to consider is keep everything at hip height or higher. You want to make it so one, people can see it, they don't miss it. And then you don't want to make customers bend over to grab produce, especially if they're older or disabled. And then you don't want to stack things so high that customers can't grab a bunch without like tipping over the entire like pyramid of carrots. I've definitely been guilty of this at the farmer's market. So a big stack looks nice, but just don't make it too big. And another tip is to visit local farmers markets for ideas about how to display your produce because there's a lot of beautiful displays there. Scott, did you have anything else to add about displays?
Not really. I think you covered the real important basics there. I would say just like when you look at our tomatoes as the example there, if something is very perishable, don't stack it so high that it's gonna smash what's below it. Be cognizant of how to take care of it. So if I wanted it to look fuller, I might put a false bottom in a container so that I can still create that illusion of abundance without damaging anything.
Very good advice,
But
especially with
other than that,
delicate tomatoes.
you've yeah.
All right. So this might seem like an obvious one, but I'm going over it because this has been cited by all the farmers I spoke to. So cleanliness is really important. People are less likely to trust your product if the shelves, doors, surfaces, and floor of your farm stand are super dirty. And keeping the area tidy reduces confusion. It's going to draw the customer's eye towards what's for sale. And it makes it easier to keep the whole farm stand clean if you don't have a bunch of boxes stacked everywhere and knickknacks and all of that. So, very helpful. You're going to have to rearrange the produce once several customers have come through. People, when they shop, they pick through things. So, it just involves a lot of tidying up. And again, that keeps the focus on what's for sale and reduces confusion. I think it's a good idea to come up with weekly deep cleaning plans as well as like a daily cleaning checklist. And all this is to say it can be really hard to maintain on a farm. The cleanliness of the farm stand can be hard to maintain because you're walking through with dirty farm boots and whatnot. It's also really hard to prioritize, especially when things are busy. But I will say that 5 to 10 minutes of cleaning every day, it really adds up and it goes a long way towards building customer trust and loyalty. Pricing is also important. It's good to keep your pricing clear and consistent across all your revenue streams. So, whether you're selling at the farmer's market to CSA customers and whatnot, you don't want to be competing with yourself. And then your prices should be clearly posted next to the produce or on the bags that are for sale. As much as possible, I would say weigh things and price them out beforehand. It makes shopping really quick. I'm sorry about this picture. Please never sell your tomatoes for this cheap. It was the only picture I could find though. Um, but yeah, I think when you sell them in bulk like that, it makes it really easy to just like grab a whole thing of tomatoes instead of buying an individual one. And it makes shopping, yeah, easy, quick, and sometimes convinces the customer to buy things in bulk. And it reduces math mistakes. But when I worked on Lopez, for example, we weighed everything, or the customers weighed everything, and it worked. Lopez moves at a different pace than most places or, on the mainland, but it does work. You can have people weigh things and do that work for you. It is a good idea to keep price amounts rounded to the dollar. So if it's like, um, you'll want to sell things for at the most like 350 maybe, but it's easier if you sell it for $4, something like that. It just makes the math a lot easier if you make the prices pretty clear and easy to add up.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. We do some stuff that is less than full dollars, but we really don't have anything that people are going to weigh, which ends up being more work on our part. Sometimes we do things like size tomatoes and come up with a price point for a weight range, So some of them are gonna be, if you put it on the scale, it might be that tomato is gonna be $1, but it might weigh out that it would, at that price per pound, it would really be 90 cents. But between 90 cents and $1.25, all those tomatoes in that weight range are going to be that way. It's kind of our only solution to not having to teach all our customers how to do the math. And we do that with things like tomatoes, onions, uh, gosh, garlic. There's just a variety of things that are sold by weight that we end up selling by the each, but create different size categories with each category having its own price to it. Um, and then we pre-weigh and bag things that are often bulk, like Brussels sprouts, as an example. And so those are all like, $6 a bag for Brussels sprouts, and we just have a known weight that we bag each one at when we're prepping for restock.
And I will say that having things for sale that are just like $1 or 50 cents, it's actually really helpful for people because say they have a $20 bill and they picked out like 17 or $18 worth of produce, they're gonna grab that head of garlic for $1 or $2 and throw it in their bag. So it is nice to have some lower cost individual things for people to buy. It results in more sales for you. This is another angle of that same checkout area at Chai's Farm Stand. So the checkout area is pretty important. There's some things to consider. There should be a space to set bags down. So people like fill up their bags with produce. There needs to be a spot where they can set that down, look through it, add everything up. Some farm stands have a notepad for writing down the transaction. It's also a way for people to add up the produce they got. Not everyone uses this, but it is a way to track sales and inventory and see if everything lines up. It's a good way to track theft. Then there's usually always a calculator. Don't assume that everyone uses their phones or can do the math, in their head. And it's a good idea to have hand sanitizer. Um, yeah, public health rules vary, but if there's any sort of refrigerated or frozen products for food safety, usually there's a hand washing station that's required. But the bare minimum, have some hand sanitizer for people, especially if they're going to be touching on the produce. Often there's a place where people can like bring in their grocery bags, like their paper grocery bags or their reusable ones, and leave them at the farm stand. This is really helpful for customers that just pop in and they weren't planning to come. And then they can fill up a bag of produce, and you don't have to spend a bunch of money providing bags for them. And it's a good idea to consider placing impulse purchases right next to the checkout area. So people, I mean, they do this at grocery stores, right? We're not reinventing the wheel. So it's a good place to put those items so people can impulsively buy them, which is why it was very smart that Scott put those cherry tomatoes there. I would have been tempted and I would have bought some if I hadn't decided to already. Um, and then another thing is like I said that you should have directions, but you should also have on there a way for people to contact you if they have a question. And lastly, a place, sometimes people have an area where you can, customers can drop off their berry cups or their egg cartons. If you're selling eggs from the farm, you can reuse those egg cartons if it's an on-farm sale. Payment, it all depends on what you're comfortable with and what your customers are comfortable with as far as what payment you accept. So you can do cash or check, a credit card machine, or a tablet or like a tap to pay machine, whether you're staffed or it's self-serve. Some farm stands only use Venmo or PayPal. You can have that as an option. And then lastly, there are a few farm stands in the area that use Snap, WIC, or Market Match dollars. And Fat Turnip is the only farm that I interviewed that uses those. So I will, on the resource guide that I sent out, I will include contact information for Clallam, Jefferson, and Kitsap County for people to know how they can sign up for that program. Now, Brian at Fat Turnip, he did say that there are some extra steps and hurdles to having those ways of accepting money. And I think it does help that they're staffed, so it's easier for people to pay in those ways. But he views it as a service to the community. And the following slide, it goes through the pros and cons of being staffed or having an honor system, but also it talks about the pros and cons of having cash or electronic payment. So with cash, it can be inconvenient to the customer, especially like if you only accept cash, that can be pretty easy to lose sales that way because we just live in a time where people less and less often have cash on them. But the pro for the farmer is that they don't have to pay a percentage fee to the credit card company or to Venmo or whatnot. Now, if you only take card or online payment, this can be convenient to the customer, but it can also alienate like some not tech savvy customers, especially if you only use like Venmo or PayPal. And then the farmer pays a fee, but it's easy to track sales and it's also much safer as far as theft goes. And Scott, did you have anything to add to payment?
Um, I would just say we've chosen to kind of try and capture all of them We have the honor system where people can put cash or check. We accept Venmo, PayPal, and give people instructions on how they can use a credit card. It's a little clunky via logging on to our website, and but there's a handful of customers that very consistently choose that option. And so we're just trying to make it as easy for people to pay in any way that they want, so that it can happen any of those ways. I love the Venmo and PayPal for not having to worry about the cash box, but I'm accepting cash, so I always have to worry about the cash box, and that is the one downside of it is that I don't live where the farm stand is, so every evening of the year, basically, I or someone else has to go empty the cash box just in case. We feel pretty good about our security there, but just to not have that risk, we take that extra step, and that's one con for us.
So yeah, this is a cash box like Scott was just talking about. And so there are some security measures that you can take if you are a self-serve honor system farm stand. You can have cameras and lights. There's security systems now that hook up right to your phone. So you can see who comes in and out if you want to know that. And other ways is to have only credit card sales, only tap to pay, online sales. You can have an inventory sheet, like I said, to track not only your best sellers, but also if people are stealing from you. And then anyone who accepts cash or check, if they don't already install these, they pretty quickly do. And that's just because if people know there's cash, eventually they're going to find out and start stealing it. And it's just the reality. So on the left is the one that Scott has at Chai's Farm Stand. And then on the right, that's a retail cash box that you can buy online from a place called Meadow Creature. I will put a link to it in the resource list, and I'm sure there's some other welded boxes that are equally strong. But Scott, it's a pretty cool story how you got your cash box. Do you want to tell it?
Well, I started in the beginning of this with a wooden box screwed to the table in that same location, which worked well for a while, and then eventually it got broken into, and I played the catch a catch a thief with a picture game for a while until I finally did get a picture of him. And while the police weren't able to do anything with it, I put it up online, and within a few hours, the person was called out by name and where they worked was provided, and so instantly the theft stopped there, and then we upgraded to a wooden box or a metal box, which I knowingly just bolted to the table, which eventually, after, a couple of years of being fined, that suddenly disappeared one night from the table, the whole box. And so then we had another box made, which then we anchor into the ground in concrete and have very substantial now, but it used to have a hinged lid on it, and the thieves found a way to break into the hinged lid and pry it open that way. So it's just been this constant game of trying to find all the weak points and making something that is just absolutely secure. At one point, I went online and looked for cash boxes, and like at state parks and stuff, there's they call them the Iron Ranger, and it's just a big giant stand that's set in concrete, that's steel. But they were, $1,000 or something. It would just seemed really ridiculous. And most of us know somebody who's got good welding skills if you ask around your community, and you can find somebody who's willing to help out. And the one thing that I was really struck by is as I would go through these various iterations of theft, and I would tell people about it. The buy-in that you get from the community to want to help you is really kind of phenomenal, because I would tell people, and most people's response would start with something like, well, you know what we should do? And they would have their idea of how to catch a thief. But I found it interesting that it was very we was how they were always phrasing it. And everybody really wanted to help the farm and the farmer not get stolen from, and so it was really quite easy to find some welders who they were into the cause and willing to help with donating some time and materials to make it happen. Not that that's how it has to be, but it was just there's a lot of friends of keeping your money safe out there if you want to go that route.
Yeah, so that's depending on like your community connections to help you out. That's how Scott got this box welded. So you don't necessarily have to go online and buy, I believe the box on the right is upwards of $300, so they're not cheap. So marketing also comes into play with farm stands, though I'm going to start out by saying that like none of the farm stands I know about do much marketing. I don't know. I'm not answering for Scott. We'll ask him in a moment what he does, but a lot of the farm stands I know, they started out small. They already had a loyal customer base and they just kind of grew from there. But that isn't to say you can't use marketing or you shouldn't. I think it can go a long way to building your business more quickly, acquiring new customers, and especially if you're going to be depending on your farm stand for a lot of business and you want it to grow more quickly than just using word of mouth. I will also say, though, that word of mouth is one of the best forms of advertisement ever. And I think we all know that. So you're
Yeah.
gonna want to tailor your marketing. Oh yeah, Scott, do you want to go ahead and let me know what do you use for marketing?
Well, all of what you have listed there, but when you're starting a farm stand, it can be a little daunting of like, how do you let people know what's going to get the most traffic, what's going to get the most attention? And so I was trying to use social media, and that was fairly effective. I want to say that honestly, when the COVID lockdown happened, we were on track with our farm stand already started and growing, and that was the absolute boost that we really needed. So we just had the happenstance of great timing there where all of a sudden everybody in the community was looking for a place to get food, and we were one of a handful in the community that had it. And so that brought a huge amount of attention towards us because people told people the word of mouth was incredible there. But we continue to use social media and talk about it in our website. And then we, through word of mouth, also have developed a newsletter with a lot of people. And it's something that's beyond my time investment now, and I pay somebody every week to write a newsletter. But every week the newsletter talks about what one vegetable or topic that seems relevant to the farm at that time of the year is, and it provides a few recipes that we just have skimmed from the internet somewhere. We've figured out some good sources by now. Um, and it has a list of what is available or should be available in the farm stand for that week. And it's very effective. People will read the newsletter and within a couple of hours come down and be looking for a new item in the farm stand. And I know many times I've posted on social media with a picture of, hey, the first tomatoes are in the farm stand, but it might have only just been a small first harvest. And in a couple of hours, it sold out. And then I have people contacting me saying, I saw your post on whatever social media platform, but I didn't see any in the farm stand. So I know that multiple different avenues, people really do pay attention to them and use them as a tip to know when they can get something at the farm stand. So as best as you can, all of those really help. Um, I would say we've surpassed a critical mass where newsletter and social media are telling as many new people, and a lot more seem to come from word of mouth. Every time I see somebody who says it's their first time in the farm stand, they say someone else told them about it.
No, that's great. I think it's especially important to highlight the value of being able to communicate in real time with your customers. Um, yeah, you can use it to announce, you can use social media or your website to announce like special events, limited edition products. You can announce if there's a weather cancellation and um, you can tell them if when there's new items in the farm stand. And I think that goes a long way to building that customer trust. Um, yeah, so you'll want to tailor your marketing to your demographic. If they're an older generation, they might read the paper still, or they might use Facebook instead of like Instagram or TikTok. And physical signage might be a better choice, but really or a lot of people use social media these days and websites and are pretty tech savvy. So you can advertise across a multitude of avenues. There's also visibility on community and regional outreach, like websites. Oftentimes, an Office of Tourism will have a farm stand map or a farm map. You can put your information on there. The Eat Local First has a map with different farm stands all across Washington. You can put your farm stand on there to find customers, and so customers can find you. And then again, that clear, legible, eye-catching signage is a really good way to show people where you are and customers that might not know about you. They might not have friends that shop there, but they might see a sign, get curious, come on in, and then you have more customers. And you can also collaborate with other farm stands. Like one idea is to make a passport that can be stamped at a bunch of different farm stands. And when it's full, the customer gets a prize or a discount. You can publicize with a local story online. Um, One cool thing is Fat Turnip was on Evening Magazine, and I believe they found them because they had a post on Instagram that somehow went viral. This was back in 2023, and Brian sent me a screenshot. They reached like 78 million people with this post. So I don't know how social media works. It's really wild, but that's another great way that social media can be used to reach customers and gain some traction. You can also advertise in your other existing outlets, like at the farmers market or with your CSA customers. And I think this is really crucial if you're a year-round farm stand, because when the farmers market and the CSA are ending, you can tell customers how they can continue to access produce from you. It's very helpful for people. And I think it's especially important to just think about telling your farm story to customers that come in. Who's shopping with you and where do your values align? And that includes making sure people know if you're certified organic or if you're using organic practices, if all the produce you're selling is local, and they want to know where else you sell in the community. They want to know if your food is in any restaurants. It's a good way to collaborate with local businesses. They want to know if they can find your food at the co-op or something. Now, also, people want to know who makes up your farm, who the owners or co-owners are, who the employees are. They want to see pictures of farm animals. Everybody loves farm animals, right? And then make sure to include other community connections. I saw this at Chai's farm stand. He had some posters on the bulletin board there by the checkout stand. It's a great way to create more community connection. You know, people are curious about local farms. They want to know where their money is going to and who it supports. This is always going to go towards building more loyalty. And it's also interesting for people that are passing through. It helps them learn about the area. It's just all these are different ways of connecting with the customer. Also, farm stands can help out with complementary revenue streams. I think the biggest piece of this is agritourism. If you already have people coming to your farm, why not sell them some of the produce that you grow there? So if you do you pick farm tours, pumpkin patches, if you have some sort of bed and breakfast or Airbnb, any sort of agritourism, a farm stand is going to complement that really well. And then with CSA customers and farmers market customers, it just gives them more ways to shop with you, and you can work with other food producers as well. And then lastly, I saw some ideas about having a cooperative farm stand, which I think is a great idea because it can share those responsibilities among more people. It can expand the offerings that you have there. It can be a way of sharing that burden of always having to be at the farm stand. You can alternate weekends. It gives you more freedom to take vacations. So I thought that was a really interesting business model. All right. So in conclusion, I just want to drive home the biggest principle that I've found in my years of working in farm stands and what I've also heard from the other farmers that I interviewed. And I think I can sum it up with consistency being everything. It's key. Um, So I included this picture from Chai's farm stand. It has all of the produce according to the season. So when people can expect to see things, I think that is such an important piece of communication. So I've seen some mistakes over the years visiting farm stands and other places. And I think a lot of dissatisfaction can come from inconsistent availability of product, inconsistent quality, lack of cleanliness, and inconsistent hours. So I think something to always keep in mind is customers often have to go out of their way to reach you, and they might only give your farm stand one or two visits before giving up. It isn't like going to the grocery store or likely your farm stand isn't surrounded by a bunch of other shops. What I'm saying is it can be inconvenient to go to the farm stand. So if that customer shows up and there's very little to purchase, the place is disorganized, produce is limp or going bad, you're all sold out, or you're closed during open hours, like during your posted hours, they might not give you another chance and they might damage your reputation around the community. So always make sure you're making it worth their time to return, and then they're going to be loyal. They're going to help build up your reputation, and they're going to ensure that your business continues to grow. So I think consistency is just such a huge part of building that customer trust. But the downside is we all know that farming can be inconsistent. You can have staffing issues, you can have weather issues. That's where I think signage, like what you see at Chai's farm stand, I think that's where it's really important because even if you can't control the amount of offerings you have, for instance, if it's a really bad year or if it's a slow spring, like really cold, you can have consistent communication with people. So if people know you regularly update your modes of communication, like social media, they'll check it for things like new crops coming in. And they're also going to see when products run out or eggs slow down for the season or closures. You can tell them these are the last tomatoes of the season, or our hens just started laying again. We're going to have eggs again. They're going to see that. They're going to know to check in. And that goes a long way for kind of limiting that frustration from customers. And I think it's also good for customers to have a way to communicate with you. Um, and then going back to this poster at Chai's farm stand, I think so. Yeah, like I said, it lists what people can expect to see with each season. I think it helps educate people. They might not know. Like I've had people come in like November and December at a farm stand and ask for zucchini. And it seems funny, right? But like people, like you can go to the grocery store though and buy zucchini from Mexico. So it's like people just literally don't know what can grow at what time of year. So it helps communicate that. And it just goes a long way to managing people's expectations and always coming back to like building that customer satisfaction so your farm stand can continue to thrive. Yeah.
I would just really reiterate that the consistency is hugely important. You know, while we don't have all of our offerings all year long, there's a few things because we have a lot of greenhouse space and salad mix is our most popular item. I try to never run out of salad mix, and I have a really loyal following of people because they know almost any day of the year they can show up and find salad mix there, and it's not there one day and gone for three and there for two and gone for a day. It's like literally every day, unless there's some absolute crazy thing, it's there. And then they buy a bunch of other things while they're there, most of them. But all the ways in which you highlighted consistency being important, I would agree with.
Yeah, that's great. I love having that focus on a product that people that's really versatile and that people really love and really honing in on that and making sure it's always available. That's yeah, just a really smart business move. All right. And then lastly, I just wanted to point out that I not only interviewed farmers, but I pulled some information from these various sources. And I'll be posting links to these articles in the resource list that I will be sending out. And the resource list is also going to be posted on our Regional Small Farms website. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Let's see. Well, of course, I can't figure it out. Let's see. Anyways, I will keep messing with that. I don't know how to get it to quit. Oh, there we go. I figured it out. Okay. So it's getting close to the end of the class, but I just wanted to have some time for Q&A with folks. And I do see that some people dropped some questions in the chat. And also, I have questions for Scott as well. So I'll go over those questions first, and then we can open it up to everyone. Um, so yeah, I guess starting out, Scott, I was just hoping you could kind of give us an overview of your farm stand journey.
It started as just a little sideline of can I get some extra salad mix out the door? And meanwhile, I was trying to focus on running a small CSA and servicing some local restaurants. And when I started to see the popularity of the salad mix and other items at the farm stand, I just looked around and said the money at the retail price point is way better at the farm stand. How can I do more of this? And just leaned into it, and bought that reach in fridge and kind of never looked back and have continually been focusing on how can I build the farm stand part of the business more and more for many of the reasons that you stated of not having to go anywhere and getting the like to a farmer's market and not having to take a cut in price to sell in a more wholesale way to restaurants or grocery stores. And so it's just been really awesome that the timing has been good where a lot of the community has been looking for a shopping experience like we're providing. But it just keeps absolutely growing. I would say, you know, when I started selling at the farm stand 8 years ago, it was kind of an inconsequential amount of our income every year. It came from it. And I haven't totaled everything from last calendar year, but the year before we were at somewhere over 70% of our gross revenue for the farm came from the farm stand. And literally, that is just a Costco tent that has siding and a roof on it. And so it has really become a hugely important part of the farm and is on a great growth trajectory. So anytime a restaurant now, drops off of ordering, I'm not actually that hungry to sell them salad mix at half price when I can just turn around and smile at the next new person that's starting to shop at the farm stand.
Yeah, that's amazing. 70%. It's a big number.
Yeah, and that's not because our other revenue streams have diminished radically. It's because the farm stand has just continued to grow.
Okay, so you're saying that you're not pulling customers so much from other revenue streams.
No, as an example, our CSA peaked 2 years ago at like 196 members, and last year we had like 162 or something. So it's down some, but the dollars that it's down from those 30 some shares, like it's tenfold more that we have made up in farm stand customers and the just any other way that we are doing slightly less, we're doing a little less restaurant business post COVID, but we're just doing tons and tons more farm stand business.
Yeah, it's amazing. How does your farm stand affect crop planning? Like, are you adjusting a little bit differently than you would for like farmers market or CSA?
Yeah, it definitely adds another element to crop planning, that kind of like a farmer's market is a little bit of an unknown. You don't know exactly how many people are going to show up on a given day to buy a particular product. And so it's kind of just on averages. We have a pretty rustic tracking system. We basically just track everything that we stock, and we're fortunate enough that we don't really have any loss. We keep it stocked appropriately so that it all sells in a day or two, and there's not enough loss to really be concerning. And so then we can look at the monthly, how many units went out the door. And I can use that information in subsequent years to kind of plan, all right, what's our weekly or monthly volume that we need? How do I plant the farm to accommodate for that? And so I can treat that as kind of one home for the produce, the CSA is another home for produce, and then wholesale, and then I can aggregate those figures to come up with the total that I need to be producing for any particular point in the season. But it is different. Like if I know I have 100 small shares of CSA, I know exactly how many of everything I need on the weekly to pack in that box. I don't know if there's going to be 100 or 130 units they're going to want to go out the door through the farm stand.
Yeah, there's a bit more unknown versus a CSA, which is, you know,
Right. But over time, you get used to the averages, I would say. We've been doing it long enough now where although those averages are always changing a little bit, it's growing, we're able to pretty well forecast what we're going to need.
um, and then you said that you haven't used any grant funding for the farm stand.
No, not for the farm stand itself, only high tunnel grant for the greenhouse spaces that we have.
Okay, so that'd be through NRCS. And then do you plan on using grant funding in the future?
If I can find some that's available, because we definitely have talked about what would it take to expand the farm stand as we're really in the summer days, we're really just in too tight of a space. And I'm worried about being in the situation where we will turn customers away just because it becomes too crowded of a shopping experience for some folks. So if there's grant funding to help build out a farm stand in the future, I would really love to be able to figure out how to access that.
Yeah, I think something like perhaps the infrastructure grant would be a good one for that.
Yeah.
And then So if you had like advice to offer, what is something that you like, what's a decision you made with your farm stand that led to your success? Like what is something you did right?
Um, I think just committing to the idea that I was going to stock a fridge all the time and really make it a focus of where I wanted to put product, I started to prioritize putting that product on the shelf of the farm stand rather than trying hard to find a restaurant to buy it. So it was just that shift in priority from, oh, I've got to serve these restaurants to I've got to keep my farm stand stocked with the things that people are going to want. And then if I have extra, I can find a home for it somewhere else at a restaurant. Um, and then just being committed to that idea and doing it consistently, like you pointed out, that has just made all the difference that we are always stocking it and always keeping it uh, as a main focus of what our business is doing.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good answer because I think with farming, yeah, like you don't always know how much you're going to be able to harvest, what the yield is going to be. So it can be hard to juggle those different priorities to create
Hmm.
consistency. And then what would you do differently if you could start your farm stand again, if you were like starting it tomorrow?
That's a great question. Um, I don't know that I would do a whole lot different um, because all through the process, I've thought, gosh, this is just kind of a shabby little shed. And while made the point of, keep things tidy, keep things neat, compared to a concrete floor, the plywood and gravel seems really rustic. Um, but what it's really shown me is the produce being fresh and clean and cold and the convenience of everything are much more important to people than whether or not there's a couple of cobwebs in the corner or a little bit of dirt in the gravel floor.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I also pointed out when I was showing examples of your farm stand, like, yes, it's gravel and plywood, but it's like swept clean, so it's still, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think you were poking fun at my plywood floor, but I think just keep it simple, stupid. That old saying, it's like even though I thought I should be doing it different and was just too busy and too cheap to do it different, I think that I showed myself like, oh, there's some stuff that I was in the back of my mind saying are more important than they actually are, is the point that I wanted to make to other folks.
Yeah. No, that's a really it's good advice to offer people, and I think it just shows that like the produce is the product, the produce is the best form of like marketing and advertisement. Like that's what people are there for, and if it's high quality and kept, properly in the refrigerator and all of that, it's going to speak for itself and sell itself. Um,
Yes, I'm not trying to contradict you saying that a farm stand should be kept clean, though. We want it, we do want it clean. It's just
yeah,
not always like the priority. Some things weren't the
definitely.
priority that I thought
Yeah.
they might be. That's all.
And then, do you have any other advice for folks?
Um, yeah, don't be afraid to find a way to start your farm stand now, but stick with it because I see other farm stands in my community that they're there part of the time and then they're not there a lot of the time. And when they are open, they're not getting very much business. And meanwhile, our farm stand is open all the time and we have people showing up all the time. So if you think it's a halfway good idea for your location, give it a go and really try it out and see, but be willing to like really give it a go, and you might be surprised.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I like that. Start where you are. And
Yeah, it doesn't have to be some big $1 million building and a whole lot of expense and things into it. Just, find a simple way to get good product to the consumer and see what happens.
yeah, that's great. All right, so I'm gonna go over, it looks like there's a few questions here. Um, let's see. So, oh, someone wrote that they have several farmers putting their produce in the stand. Any thoughts on the best way to track the sale for reimbursement? Um, I have a couple ideas. Do you want me to take this answer, Scott?
Yeah, it's not something that I really engage in. I only put I put something very different in there, and I just pay them for it at the outset, and we're done with transaction.
Yeah. Yeah, it's Midori Farm, right? Is that what you
Yeah,
said?
they're ferments, and so it's something that has a much longer shelf life than any of my fresh products. So it's really easy to just pay them up front for it, and then take take the money from the customers. The same all the stuff goes into the same spot. I would just say the two things that I sell that aren't from my farm are bread from a local baker and the Midori, and so we just work on purchase those items and resell, and so there's not a lot of tracking and separation of cash flow. We don't make it anything that the customer pays separate for. They pay all the same way, added up together in the same place, whether it's Venmo or cash or whatever. They just pay one thing, and don't bother the customer with trying to figure that all out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good advice to not put it on the customer to track that. I think yeah, that's one way to do it is just purchase the product from the other farm and then you sell it yourself so it becomes like your responsibility kind of. It's pretty hard to track purchases like that if you're honor system or self-serve because then you're leaving it up to the customer to track that and that's really unreliable. So I would say, yeah, either purchasing it from them or the only other way that you could track it if you're not staffed and having someone record that. The way to track that would be to follow inventory and just match up what is there versus what's been sold and reimburse them that way. And then this person asks if you're essentially buying wholesale and reselling at retail, and you answered yes, Scott. So, yeah, a lot of
Yeah, I just take a small margin on those items.
okay. And some farmers will buy at a pretty low cost wholesale items, like especially from much larger farms, and then they'll resell it. There's lots of farmers that do that with like, for example, pumpkins. So that's another way to do that. All right. And then I want to open it up. Does anyone else have questions? You can either unmute or you can throw it in the chat. All right. It looks like we have no questions.
All
So,
right.
all right. And it's almost 8 o'clock. So it's a good long presentation, you guys. I hope you learned a lot. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to join us. And thank you so much, Scott, for sharing so much information and being so open about what you have learned and what your experiences with farm stands has been. It's been very
Uh,
helpful.
that's great to hear. I'm happy to share.
Yeah. And then just a few more things. I'll be sending out that resource list with lots of links and everything. I'll also be sending out an evaluation. So please, please, please fill that out. It goes a long way towards being able to offer educational opportunities like this. So Once again, thank you everyone and have a good night.
All right. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.